The sun had just dipped beneath the horizon when Hal Wexler eased his old Ford truck up the gravel path that once led to the Whitmore family farm, a place he hadn't set foot on in nearly 20 years, not since the storm that locals still talked about like it had a name, like it had taken more than trees and shingles with it. It had taken people too, real people, like June Whitmore and her 3 boys. Vanished without a word the night the skies split open and the wind howled like it had a score to settle. Hal had come back because of a letter, unsigned and musty, slipped into his rural mailbox in Lakeburn, Missouri just 3 days ago, bearing only 8 words scribbled in pencil. Check the east barn. The truth's still there. The envelope was yellowed and weather-cracked, like it had waited years in some dusty drawer before being sent, and Hal couldn't ignore it, not after all he owed to the Whitmores. He'd worked those fields with his father back in the 70s, when the Whitmore spread was one of the biggest dairies in the region, its red silos gleaming in the sun and the lowing of cattle a regular hymn to the land. Now the place was a ghost farm, the mailbox rusted and tipped, the front gate bent like a tired shoulder, the fields overrun with switchgrass and burrs, the big house sagging inward with rot and time. Hal killed the engine and stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, the air thick with that late summer scent of scorched corn husks and dry earth. He was 64 now, shoulders wide but slowed, his worn denim jacket clinging to memories he didn't share much anymore. The storm had hit in October of '98, a freak supercell that ripped across 3 counties, but only the Whitmore farm had been abandoned the morning after. No signs of struggle, no wreckage but for a collapsed water tower and some blown fencing, and no human remains ever found. Officially, it was chalked up to relocation, some story about family problems and financial strain, but Hal had never believed it. June had been tough as nails, the kind who could calf a breech berth with one hand and bake a pie with the other, and she wasn't the type to flee. Her oldest, Travis, had just been accepted into a regional AG college, and the 2 younger boys, twins barely 12, had won first place in the 4-H fair for their prize goats just months earlier. People don't vanish like that, Hal had always said, but in small towns, time turns questions into silence. Now he was back, flashlight in one hand, the weight of the past on the other, walking past rusted milking machines and a half-buried Massey Ferguson tractor that hadn't moved since Clinton was in office. When he reached the east barn, one of 3 structures still partially standing, he paused at the warped double doors. The letter hadn't said what to look for, just that the truth waited here. Hal pushed the door with a grunt, and it groaned like something alive. The beam from his flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating old feed bins, spider-webbed corners, and decaying bales of hay stacked high along the left wall. He walked slowly, carefully, every creak underfoot a potential collapse, until he spotted something unusual. Underneath a fallen tarp, partially hidden by a broken plowshare, was a small metal strongbox, dented and locked with an old padlock. Heart thudding, Hal crouched, fingers brushing dust from the lid, and he knew right away this hadn't been here 20 years ago. Someone had placed it recently, the footprints around it too crisp, too fresh. He pried the box free and carried it outside, where the last strands of light still kissed the horizon. With the help of a crowbar from his truck, he popped the lock, and inside were 2 items, a black-and-white photo, yellowed and curling, of June standing beside her barn in '84, and a cassette tape labeled in smudged ink, "Don't Trust Boyd. J.W." Hal stared at the tape, then at the photo, then back again, as the wind stirred dry leaves around his boots. Boyd. Couldn't be. Sheriff Boyd Kettering? The same Boyd who'd been in charge of the storm investigation back in '98? Hal hadn't seen him in over a decade, but back then, Boyd had gone to great lengths to shut down the rumors, to declare the Whitmore disappearance nothing more than an unfortunate migration. Hal remembered the way Boyd had avoided eye contact at June's last co-op meeting, how quick he was to declare the property unsafe and off-limits not long after. And now this. A tape, after all these years, implicating him? Hal turned the cassette over in his hands, his mind spinning. He didn't have a tape player in the truck, but he knew someone who might, Carol and Fletcher, who ran the antique shop out near Highway 60, and who collected more obsolete gadgets than the county library. He'd visit her first thing in the morning. For now, Hal slipped the tape and photo into his glove box, took one last look at the barn behind him, and drove off, headlights carving through the twilight. He didn't see the figure standing at the edge of the tree line, watching his truck disappear down the gravel path, but someone had been there. Someone who knew he'd opened the box. The next morning, Hal found his truck's rear tires slashed and a note pinned under his windshield wiper that read, "Stop digging, Wexler." The land forgets for a reason. He stared at the paper, heart cold. It was too late for warnings. He wasn't turning back now. Hal Wexler stood outside Carroll and Fletcher's antique shop in the pale light of morning, gripping the cassette in his coat pocket as though it might vanish if he let it go. Her storefront was a cluttered time capsule of the 1940s to 1980s, with faded Coca-Cola signs, old radios, typewriters, chip dolls, and wood-handled tools stacked behind dusty glass panes. A rusted wind chime rattled above the door as Hal stepped inside, greeted by the familiar scent of cedar, must, and coffee that had long soaked into the old floorboards. Carroll, 72 and sharp-eyed beneath silver bangs, looked up from behind the counter and smiled, though it quickly faded when she saw Hal's face. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "Worse," Hal muttered. "I need to hear something. From 1998. He laid the cassette on the counter. Carroll blinked. "That's a hell of a request, Hal." But without asking more, she retrieved a tape deck from under the counter, plugged it in, and pressed play. The whir of the reels was followed by silence, then the strained voice of a woman, unmistakably June Whitmore. "If you're hearing this, something's gone wrong. Boyd's not what he says." Static blared. Then her voice returned, lower, frantic. "He came by again last night. Said the bank would repossess the land. That we'd all be better off gone, if we didn't play along. But it's not just about money. It's about whatever's under the northeast field. He's been digging there. Told the boys not to tell anyone. I don't know what he's looking for, but we're not safe." Hal felt his stomach twist as June's voice cracked. "I'm going to hide this in the barn. If anything happens to us, someone needs to know the truth. Don't let him erase us." The tape clicked off, leaving only the hum of the machine and the sound of Hal's heart pounding in his ears. Carroll stood still, her expression unreadable, then softly said, "I remember her. June wasn't the type to imagine things." Hal nodded slowly. "No. She knew something." He asked to borrow the tape and left the shop without another word, driving through Lakeburn with new eyes, noticing just how many signs bore the Kettering name: Kettering Realty, Kettering Storage, even the Kettering Fairgrounds built after 2001, right over Old Whitmore acreage. He parked outside the county clerk's office and spent hours combing through property records. As he suspected, the Whitmore farm had changed hands quietly in 2000, sold for a suspiciously low price to a shell corporation registered in Arkansas that was now linked to a holding company owned by Sheriff Boyd Kettering's cousin. Hal dug deeper, pulling zoning changes and land use permits, and discovered something that chilled him. The northeast field, the very one June mentioned, had been surveyed and approved for excavation just 3 months after the Whitmores vanished. The paperwork claimed it was for geological research, but no report was ever filed. Hal photocopied everything, slid it into a manila folder, and headed to the county library archives to dig up old newspaper clippings. There, he found a 1995 article buried in a back issue of the Lakeburn Ledger that referenced strange metallic readings, discovered by a private mineral firm near the Whitmore farm. The article was short, brushed off as a blip, but Hal was now convinced. Someone found something buried out there, and whatever it was, Boyd had wanted to keep it secret badly enough to make a whole family disappear. That night, Hal returned to the farm with a shovel, a flashlight, and his bones aching from fear and age. He trekked to the northeast field, which was still overgrown but showed faint signs of having been disturbed. Flattened earth, the ghost of old tire ruts, a rusted barrel half buried by weeds. He started digging near the largest patch of settled earth. After an hour of sweat and silence, his shovel struck something hard, not rock. He cleared away dirt to reveal a metal hatch, covered with a tarp and sealed with rusted bolts. Just as he reached for his wrench, a beam of light flashed behind him, a flashlight. Hal turned, squinting, and saw a silhouette step out from behind a tree. "You shouldn't be here, Wexler," the voice said. Deep, cold, familiar. It was Deputy Eli Tarman, Boyd's right hand, a man who hadn't aged well and carried a weight of quiet menace. "This land's condemned." Hal stood, shovel in hand. "That what they call the truth now?" Eli walked forward slowly. "I don't want trouble, Hal. Walk away, and we'll forget this happened." "Can't do that," Hal said. "I've got proof. I've got June's voice." Eli froze. You have the tape? Hal nodded. And I know about the shell company. The land grab. Everything. Eli sighed, then took a step closer, hand near his belt. Then you've left me no choice. But before he could draw, a distant engine roared, headlights flooding the field. Carol Ann's truck barreled over the ridge, and she leaned out the window, shotgun in hand. You touch him, I swear to God, I'll bury you under this farm. Eli froze, weighing his odds, then cursed under his breath and turned, vanishing into the trees. Carol helped Hal to his feet. You said not to get involved, she muttered. But you're a stubborn old man. Hal smiled grimly. I was hoping you were too. Together, they unbolted the hatch and pulled it open. The smell hit first. Musty, earthy, metallic. Inside was a narrow tunnel, leading downward. Hal shone his flashlight inside. Carved walls. Reinforced beams. It wasn't natural. It was a shaft. What in God's name is this? Carol whispered. Hal didn't answer. He climbed down the ladder slowly, boots echoing on the metal rungs. At the bottom, he found a corridor of concrete and steel, sealed doors with strange markings, and a rusted generator long dead. On one wall was a symbol, a triangle intersected by a circle. He snapped a photo. This wasn't just a buried storage room. It was something bigger, older, built for something hidden. And someone, decades ago, had tried to forget it. But now it was awake again. Hal Wexler didn't sleep that night. After climbing out of the hidden shaft on the Whitmore property, he and Carol Ann had sealed the hatch and marked it with brush, then returned to her house to go over the photos he'd taken underground. They sat at her kitchen table beneath the hum of an overhead fan, staring at the triangle and circle symbol that glowed dully on Hal's cracked phone screen. It reminded Hal of something ancient, arcane, not a government insignia, nor any standard marking used in construction. Carol, sifting through a stack of old county records she'd kept for years, finally dug up a 1974 geological survey that mentioned subterranean concrete formations discovered east of Lake Burn during post-flood land assessment, then redacted the following paragraph. They knew, Hal whispered. Whoever owned this land before Boyd, they knew something was down there. By morning, Hal had typed up a full summary of what he'd found so far, attached the photos, and emailed it to himself and 3 journalists he trusted in neighboring counties, a safeguard. He'd also hidden the tape recording of June Whitmore inside an old cassette player under his shed floor. When he returned to the farm later that day, Carol insisted on going with him. They descended again into the underground corridor, this time with gas masks, extra batteries, and Hal's old Polaroid camera. The air was colder than expected, stale and tinged with oil. As they explored deeper, they found more sealed metal doors and what looked like the remains of a security checkpoint, shattered monitors, a rusted panel of switches, and a filing cabinet with water-damaged papers. Most were unreadable, but one memo, stamped 1986 and marked Site AB 31, referenced Phase 3 operations delayed due to instability in Chamber 2. Carol looked at Hal and said, "This wasn't just a shelter. It was a facility." Hal nodded grimly. "And not for farming." They reached a final door at the end of the corridor, jammed halfway open by collapsed debris. Hal squeezed through and emerged into a chamber that took his breath away, a dome-shaped room lined with strange machinery and walls etched with symbols similar to the one on the surface. At the center stood a metal pedestal, its top scorched and cracked, as though something once rested there. Hal took photos, heart pounding. "Whatever was here," he murmured, "it's gone now." As they turned to leave, they heard something. A sound. Faint. Metallic. Like a lock turning. Hal raised his flashlight. "Someone's here," Carol whispered. They backed out of the room, only to see the tunnel behind them dimming. The flashlight flickered. Footsteps echoed. Carol cocked her shotgun. "Back," Hal said, pushing her toward the ladder, but before they could reach it, a man stepped from the shadows. Not Eli Tarman, not Boyd. Someone younger, in his 40s, face gaunt, eyes sharp. "You shouldn't have come back," the man said. "Who are you?" Hal demanded. The man raised a gloved hand. "Name's Logan Kettering. Boyd's nephew. This site was closed for a reason." Carol hissed. So you're the one guarding your uncle's secrets? Logan smiled coldly. Not guarding. Containing. He reached for his belt, not a weapon, but a detonator. You don't understand what you've found. Try us, Hal said. Logan sighed. That room you entered, it wasn't for storage. It was a vault. Built around something they unearthed in the 60s. Something not from here. The Whitmores found it by accident when digging a new well. Boyd wanted to harness it, but June refused. She recorded that tape to expose him. So he had to erase them. Hal's blood ran cold. And you've kept this secret all these years? Not just me, Logan said. There are others. But the thing is, it's waking up. He gestured behind them. And it won't stop unless it's sealed again. Without waiting, Logan darted past them, tossing a flare into the chamber. A rumble shook the walls. Hal grabbed Carol and ran for the ladder as fire lit up the shaft below. They scrambled up just as the tunnel caved in, sealing the hatch in a plume of dust and heat. Hal rolled onto the grass coughing. Carol lay beside him, bruised but alive. That maniac was going to bury us, she gasped. No, Hal said. He was going to bury what was down there. They drove back to Lakeburn in silence. But the next morning, Hal woke to find his house broken into. The tape, gone. His phone, wiped. The emails he'd sent, returned undelivered. Someone was already scrubbing the trail. Carol was missing too. Her truck abandoned near the fairgrounds. Hal drove to the sheriff's office, but Boyd was conveniently on vacation. Deputy Tarman just smiled when Hal demanded answers. You're playing with things you don't understand, Wexler, he said. Let it lie. But Hal had gone too far to let it lie. He went to the Ledger office, demanding to see the archives. There, he found a set of microfilm reels from 1983 that had been misfiled. One contained an article never published, a reporter's notes about strange lights and underground sounds near the Whitmore farm, linked to seismic activity. The reporter's name? Helen Wexler. His wife. She'd been looking into this decades ago, before she died in a car accident in 1985. The pieces fell into place. They killed her, Hal whispered. She was close. That night, Hal stood on the ridge overlooking the sealed field, his eyes scanning the stars. Beneath his feet, something pulsed, faint, rhythmic, like a heartbeat in the soil. The secrets buried in Lakeburn weren't just criminal, they were unnatural. And someone had gone to unholy lengths to keep them hidden. But now that Hal knew his wife had been one of the first to uncover them, he couldn't stop. He wouldn't. Whatever was under the field, it wasn't done. And neither was he. Hal Wexler didn't sleep that night. Not after what he'd seen, and certainly not with the weight of Evelyn's old camera and the brass locket nestled inside his coat pocket, both now coated with dust and questions that clung like smoke. He sat on the porch of his modest farmhouse as the sun peeled over the Kansas horizon, turning the wheat stubble fields gold, brushing every broken fence post and rusted nail with morning light that offered no comfort. The silence of the land gnawed at him, as if the very soil remembered the storm that had once buried not only the McLean family's legacy, but maybe something darker underneath it. After pouring himself a black cup of coffee that tasted like tin and regret, Hal drove back toward the abandoned McLean property, this time with a full tank, a crowbar, bolt cutters, and a thermos of strong brew he didn't expect to drink. The vault beneath the barn hadn't been designed for grain or seed storage. That much was clear now. No vents, no chute, no signs of agricultural use. Instead, the space reeked faintly of stale oil and decaying paper, and when Hal returned and pried deeper into its side panels, he found a rusted junction box and switchboard wired into the walls, their circuits long dead, their purpose forgotten. He found rows of cabinets labeled with years and codes, the kind used in government silos or research archives, and inside them were sealed envelopes stamped with faded USDA insignias, maps with topographic overlays, and one manila folder with Evelyn's initials written in blue ink. He stared at it for a long moment, his hands shaking before he opened it. Inside were pages of notes Evelyn had taken in the months before she vanished. Interviews with farm workers, environmental reports, letters she had never mailed. There was a recurring phrase circled in red pen, Bioreversion Initiative, followed by another, underlined 3 times, Foster Creek Trials. Hal remembered Foster Creek, a few miles north, just outside county lines, where flood irrigation used to spill into the lower basin before the storm rerouted it. He drove there next, tracing the route Evelyn had likely taken 20 years ago. The roads were cracked and overgrown, wild sunflower choking the gravel shoulders, and where there had once been a USDA test plot, there was now nothing but charred earth and warped fencing. In the shadow of a collapsed silo, Hal found a burned signpost, Experimental Crop Quadrant, Authorized Personnel Only. The pieces were starting to form something ugly. Whatever Evelyn had discovered, it hadn't been about the McLeans alone. It had been about the land itself, and something done to it under the guise of federal programs and agricultural aid. Back in town, Hal stopped at the local diner, not for the coffee but to talk to Doris Reynolds, who had worked as the USDA's secretary in the 1990s and was now mostly retired. Save for the morning she ran the books at her nephew's cattle feed store. Hal began, after ordering a coffee he wouldn't drink. What do you remember about Foster Creek? She froze mid-stir with her spoon in the sugar jar, then set it down. You best let sleeping dogs lie, Hal. Evelyn didn't, he said. And now I can't. Hesitated, then leaned close. There were whispers about engineered crops that weren't ready for open fields. Something about root systems mutating, drawing toxins from deep soil, disrupting aquifers. McLeans volunteered their land for the first phase. It all went quiet after the big storm. Then they vanished. Hal stared at her. So you think the storm wasn't just weather? Lowered her eyes. I think storms come in many forms. Some man-made. Hal left the diner with more questions than answers. He drove back to the McLean place again, this time circling the outer fields, now barren and brittle with thistle, until he reached the old windbreak where a line of dying cottonwoods still stood. Beneath one, he spotted what looked like a collapsed irrigation channel, except it was concrete and too straight. He pried open a rusted hatch hidden beneath debris, revealing a narrow passage leading down. It was a tunnel. With his flashlight flickering and dust floating like ash, he descended into the gloom, his boots echoing softly. The tunnel led to a room, sealed, but partially caved in. Inside were crates stamped, classified USDA/Department 9, and several leaking drums of unknown liquid, their contents absorbed into the earth over decades. He found photographs of corn rows grown under strange artificial light, root systems twice the size of normal yields, and field reports from 1984 describing anomalous growth behaviors and biological reversions during storm events. He was so focused on the reports that he didn't hear the footsteps behind him until the soft metallic click of a revolver echoed off the cement. Didn't expect to find anyone else foolish enough to crawl back down here, came a voice. Hal turned slowly, raising the flashlight to see a man about his age, face scarred by time and sun, holding a revolver low but steady. Name's Carl Landon. Used to run crop rotation studies for McLean's before the storm. Been keeping an eye on the place ever since. Then maybe you can tell me what the hell this all is, Hal said. Carl motioned him to sit on a nearby crate. It started with a drought. Feds offered McLean's a subsidy if they'd try out a new biotech seed. Said it would regenerate soil, restore yield. Thing is, it worked too well. Roots grew down into old aquifers. Changed the way water moved underground. Then the storm came. Rain hit land it couldn't absorb. Water rose up instead of draining. McLean's were home. Never made it out. Hal felt the weight of Carl's words settle like lead. So it wasn't just a storm. It was a chain reaction. That's the nice way of putting it, Carl said. Truth is, we played God. And the McLeans paid for it. Hal left the tunnel shaken. Back home, he spread Evelyn's documents across his kitchen table, tracing her steps, her handwriting, her warnings. One page stood out, a map of underground water tables with a note, potential sink risk near East Silo. Hal knew that silo. It had always leaned slightly, and Evelyn had taken photos of it months before her disappearance. The next morning, with the wind sharp and dry, he returned to the East Silo and climbed the ladder to the top. From there, he could see the land stretched out for miles, familiar and unfamiliar all at once. Then he noticed it. A subtle depression in the earth around the silo, like the ground had breathed and exhaled, a scar that hadn't been there before. He descended quickly and walked the perimeter, testing each step. On the northern side, he found an access hatch buried under brush. It was locked with a chain, fresh, not rusted. Someone had been maintaining this. He knelt, examining the lock, and saw initials scratched into the metal. E.W. Evelyn Wexler. She had been here. She had locked it herself. He cut the chain and opened the hatch, revealing a spiral stairway descending into darkness. As he stared into the void, a question echoed louder than fear. What had Evelyn found that made her seal it shut, and why had she never come back? Hal stepped onto the metal stairwell with breath tight in his chest, the air inside the shaft colder than the outside by a dozen degrees, as if whatever lay below had been sealed in for decades and forgotten. The spiral creaked with each step, metal groaning in protest under his boots as the darkness seemed to drink his flashlight beam the farther he went. When he reached the bottom, the chamber opened into a concrete vault, octagonal and low-ceilinged, walls lined with black plastic containers that looked like body lockers or military shipment crates, each marked not with words but with numbers and stenciled symbols Hal didn't recognize. There was a console embedded into the far wall, covered in dust, switches long dead, a screen shattered. Evelyn's initials were there again, this time carved into the concrete near the base of the console with something sharp. She had been here, and she had left it locked. Hal walked carefully, his instincts screaming that whatever had been built here had never been meant for public eyes. One of the black crates was ajar. Inside was a twisted coil of roots, dead now, shriveled and dry, but tangled around a core of metal piping, like a plant had tried to grow around or through it. Not roots. Tubers. Engineered. Beside the crate lay a notebook, its cover peeled with water damage, but inside Evelyn's handwriting remained, sharp and furious. They told me this was about restoring fertility. About helping farms survive dust season. But it was never that. It was about controlling water. Making the aquifers obedient. They fed the land poison disguised as salvation. And now they're trying to bury it with silence. Hal flipped through page after page of documentation. Dates, locations, names. A project code name, Reclamation 9. Test subjects, several local farms, including the McLean property. Timelines aligned. The engineered routes were designed to respond to electric pulses and atmospheric pressure, theoretically self-regulating in drought or flood. In practice, they had ruptured the aquifer systems beneath several properties, destabilizing the region's natural water flow. Then the storm had come. And the storm had triggered the roots. Evelyn had traced it all. She had documented not only the experiments, but what came after, the cover-up. Payments funneled through shell accounts, falsified inspection reports, even a fire at the USDA records annex that destroyed all local soil research from 1983 to 1992. Hal's hand shook as he closed the book. He now knew what had killed the McLeans, what had nearly buried Evelyn's work, but what haunted him was this. If she had left this place locked and never returned, then what had stopped her from publishing what she found? Why had she vanished completely instead of going public? He returned to town, Evelyn's notebook hidden beneath his coat, and parked 3 blocks away from the old community library. The building was closed and unused for years, but Hal still had the master key from his time as city records clerk. Inside, dust motes danced in the afternoon light cutting through old glass, and the silence was the kind that only accumulates in abandoned places, heavy and thick with waiting. He entered the basement where archive boxes were kept. Some bore Evelyn's labels, years, names, property data. In a folder marked Private E.W., he found a photograph that made his chest seize. Evelyn, standing beside a man in a USDA jacket. Not a stranger, Carl Landon. Younger, cleaner, but unmistakable. On the back of the photo, Carl, 1989, post-Foster Creek trial. Hal blinked hard. Carl had claimed he'd only been a crop rotation advisor, but this photo suggested something more direct, more deeply embedded in the program. Hal took the photo and drove straight to Carl's trailer outside of town. No answer. But the door was unlocked. Inside, the trailer was quiet, save for the ticking of a clock and the hum of a refrigerator. On the table sat a bottle of rye, half-finished, next to a thick folder labeled Evelyn. Hal opened it. Clippings, photographs, notes. Carl had been following Evelyn's movements long after the storm. He had tracked her interviews, her filing attempts with newspapers, even the date she had contacted USDA officials in D.C. One note stood out, scribbled in a different hand. Intercepted June 1993, silence guaranteed. The phrase was chilling. Hal turned slowly as he heard the door open behind him. Carl stood in the doorway, eyes tired, face not surprised. "You went to the vault," he said. "You knew," Hal whispered. Carl sighed. "I warned her to back off. I never wanted her hurt." "What happened to her?" Hal asked. "She found something in the north silo. A secondary root system. It had fused with something deeper underground. She thought it was expanding, changing the aquifer. She was scared, Hal. Said she was going to the press." "Did she?" Carl looked away. "They stopped her. Men in suits. I don't know who they were. I think she recorded them." Hal's blood ran cold. "Do you have the tape?" Carl reached under the floorboard and handed him a small cassette recorder. "She mailed it to me. Said if anything happened to her, I'd know who to give it to. But I didn't. I was afraid." Hal took the recorder back to his truck, drove to the last working radio repair shop in town, and had it converted to digital. That night, in the glow of his laptop, he played the tape. Evelyn's voice, calm but urgent. "If you're hearing this, I've been silenced. This is not a theory. It's real. The storm wasn't natural. The roots, Reclamation 9, they reacted to pressure change. Someone activated them. I saw them grow, twist, pulse. I've seen land rise and breathe. This is more than farming. It's manipulation. And they'll do it again if no one stops them." The tape ended in static. Hal stared at the screen. He now had what Evelyn died for. But he also had a decision to make. Exposing it meant risking everything. His life, the town's fragile quiet, maybe even more bloodshed. But silence meant complicity. The next morning, he packed his truck with fuel, maps, Evelyn's notebook, the tape, and drove toward Kansas City. Toward a journalist he once trusted. Behind him, the wind stirred the fields. And somewhere beneath that soil, roots slept, waiting. Let me know when you're ready for the final part 6, where Hal faces the fallout of revealing the truth, or the consequences of those who want it buried. The drive to Kansas City took 6 hours, most of it through stretches of open farmland that looked the same no matter how far Hal drove, the same leaning fence posts, the same rows of scorched cornstalks, the same rusting mailboxes guarding cracked driveways that led nowhere. The weight of Evelyn's notebook sat beside him like a co-pilot, and each time he glanced at it he imagined her voice, low and determined, cutting through the static on that recording. He reached the city just after dark, parked beneath a flickering streetlight 3 blocks from the regional headquarters of the Missouri Tribune, and stepped into the neon-lit lobby with his bag under one arm and exhaustion written across his face. The young man at the desk stared at him like he didn't belong, but Hal gave him a name, Jennifer Price, and after a long pause, the man nodded and motioned him upstairs. Jennifer had been a junior journalist back when Hal worked in county records, eager and stubborn, always chasing something deeper than the headlines allowed. Now she was mid-40s, sharp-eyed, and still had that same quiet intensity as she ushered Hal into her office and shut the door behind him. "You look like hell," she said. "You're not far off," Hal replied, then set the notebook, the flash drive with Evelyn's audio, and Carl's folder on her desk. "This is everything." She didn't speak for several minutes as she flipped through the notebook, scanned a few of the entries, played a fragment of the tape. When she finally looked up, her face was pale. "If even half of this is true," Hal nodded. "It's all true. Evelyn didn't die in that flood. She disappeared. Someone made sure of it. And this, whatever this project was, Reclamation 9, it's still active. Or buried. But not dead." Jennifer leaned back, chewing the inside of her cheek. "Do you know what this means?" "I know it'll piss off the right people." They worked through the night. Jennifer called in 2 trusted colleagues, a data analyst and a legal advisor, and by dawn, they had outlined a timeline, cross-checked USDA records, confirmed at least 3 farms across the state that had experienced similar anomalies during the late 80s. all tied to soil restoration trials, all linked to the same research grant from a shell company that no longer existed. Hal barely felt the hours pass. For the first time since Evelyn vanished, he felt like he wasn't carrying this alone. But by noon, Jennifer looked troubled. "Someone's been here," she said. "What do you mean?" "The server logs. Someone accessed my email last night. Through a VPN. They're watching already." Hal closed the notebook. "Then we publish now. Before they shut it down." Jennifer nodded, fingers flying across her keyboard, assembling a draft with embedded documents, verified scans, and Evelyn's audio file. But before she could hit upload, the power went out. Not just in her office, across the entire floor. Then the alarms kicked in. Emergency lights flickered. A fire warning blinked across the security monitor. Jennifer swore and grabbed a flash drive. "We're not uploading from here. Come on." They fled through the stairwell, past other reporters spilling into the halls with phones in hand and questions flying, and burst out into the humid afternoon. Her car was parked 2 blocks away. They climbed in, Jennifer driving fast toward a university campus with unfiltered public Wi-Fi. But as they crossed the intersection, Hal noticed a black SUV in the mirror. "We're being followed." Jennifer didn't answer, just took a hard right down a side street. Another turn. Then another. But the SUV stayed close. At a red light, the SUV pulled up beside them, and Hal caught sight of a man in the passenger seat, head shaved, wearing dark lenses. Military, maybe. Not local. Jennifer turned again, pulling into a crowded parking garage. They ditched the car and ran up the ramp, weaving through parked vehicles until they found a stairwell. 2 floors down, Jennifer pulled Hal into a janitor's closet and waited, listening. The SUV passed below. Silence. Then footsteps. Heavy, slow. Hal held his breath. The footsteps faded. Jennifer took out the flash drive. "We need another way." "Back to the library," Hal said. "I've still got a landline there. Dial up. It'll take hours, but no one can trace it fast enough." They made it back by nightfall. The library was empty, lights still dead, but Hal had candles and backup power. Jennifer connected the drive to his ancient desktop, booted the terminal, and began uploading the documents to 3 journalists she trusted, independent ones, not corporate-backed. As the files crawled their way through the decades-old modem, Hal kept watch at the window, shotgun resting beside the chair. At 3 a.m., the upload completed. They sent the final email. The story was out. The rest would be up to the world. 2 days later, the headline appeared on a fringe but credible news outlet, "Buried Roots, the USDA's Quiet Catastrophe." Evelyn's name was finally public again. Her voice heard. The audio played across thousands of feeds. And then bigger outlets picked it up. By the end of the week, a congressional subcommittee had been formed to investigate the USDA's past soil experiments. Local families began coming forward. A woman from Nebraska claimed her father had worked on root reactors and vanished during a site cleanup in 1992. Another family near Foster Creek found blueprints buried in an attic crawlspace. Hal watched it unfold from his farm, phone turned off, TV silent. He sat beneath the oak where he used to read with Evelyn, her notebook in his lap. The storm that destroyed the McLeans had been man-made. The droughts, the floods, maybe even the deaths that followed. It had all been orchestrated in the name of progress, of control. But now the roots had been uncovered. The silence broken. And Evelyn, wherever she was, had won. Hal didn't need applause. He just needed to know the truth had survived. At night, he still dreamed of the vault, the strange twisting coils in the crates, the hum of forgotten machines. He suspected there were more vaults like it. More secrets buried beneath the land. But someone else could find them now. He had done his part. As summer turned to fall, the fields outside his window stood still and golden, no longer trembling under the weight of hidden systems. For now, the land could rest. And Hal finally could too.